So we have moved on from lesson 2 and we are now on lesson 3. So we're more than 25% of the way through this first module. So well done. And today is all about target markets. We'll go into it in more detail just now, but I just want to recap what were the outcomes of lesson 2, our previous lesson. We looked at marketing funnels. Then we looked at determining objectives as well as looking through some common objectives. There are tons, as I'm sure you now know. Then we looked at briefly the importance of tracking, and this will definitely come up again in later modules of this course. Then a quick introduction into Google Analytics, and as you know, there'll be more on that later as well. What are we learning today? You are going to learn how to define your target market before we move on to different targeting options across some top channels. Then we'll look at customer journeys and different touch points that are experienced when interacting with a business. And then finally, why remarketing is crucial. First up, I want to ask you, what does AIDA stand for? It's from the previous lesson. Does it stand for A, awareness, indecision, decision, and application? Or B, awareness, interest, desire, and action? And the answer is B, awareness, interest, desire, and action. It is the traditional marketing funnel. So let's move on to defining your target market. Now, your target market is the group of people who could benefit from your product or service, whereas your target audience are the people that you're actively trying to sell to. So there is quite a difference between the two, and it is, all those terms are things that will come up quite a bit, particularly a target audience as we're focusing more on paid media, but that is important to know. Okay, just a quick note on new or young businesses. You can still define your target market and target audience, but won't be able to fully determine your customer journey just because you either don't have any customers or the volume might be too low. So what you'll need to do in the meantime is rely on objectives and then your marketing funnel if you've chosen one until there's enough data. Then you also won't be able to fully determine your buyer personas because these are based on detailed audience research. And again, you don't have that audience currently. We are, of course, going to go through these in some more detail, but just to note that. So step 1 is to ask yourself, what problem is your product solving? If we just go through a few examples, let's say you're a cake shop. Literally, the problem that you are solving is providing cake to people who don't want to or can't bake. So providing things for those special occasions or events or birthdays. We all know what cake's about. If you are something like a video on demand platform, as for example, Netflix, the problem that Netflix is solving is that it relieves boredom, provides entertainment and information. And we all know, of course, we are constantly looking for things to distract and educate us. So this is very huge at the moment. If you are something a little bit more B2B, like office printer paper, of course, the problem that this business is solving is not being able to print because, of course, if you don't have paper, you can't print. So step 2, after asking yourself what problem or problems your product or service is solving, is then going into more detail and asking, who are you going to solve the problem for? You can't solve the problem for anyone, for everyone. So this is where you need to go into a bit more detail. Let's go through a clothing example. So the questions that you need to think about are things like, are you selling women's, men's, or children's clothing, or a combination of these? Are you selling to any age, or are there specific ages? Is the pricing high-end, affordable, or cheap? And then, do you offer local, national, or global distribution at all? Now, the last 3 questions will be applicable to any business, but of course the first one is for clothing. Guys, if you can think of any examples that you would like me to include, whether it's in future lessons or just in general, what your experience is or what you would like to learn more about, then the next step is within those groups of people that you have identified so far, can you identify any specific consumer behaviors or interests? Now, what I'm about to take you through might look like stereotypes, but that is not the intention. Essentially, you do have to start with that kind of thing, but it's also just about common sense and strategy. And of course, if you have data and research to work with, but let's just go through some examples, keeping clothing as the theme. So if we break it down to someone who is selling athletic wear, for example, I think you can assume that whoever is buying this wear is active, or at least planning to be active. They might like to keep healthy and shop accordingly, as that also goes along with exercise and being active generally. They might have disposable income, and this, of course, does depend on the pricing. If you are on the high end of pricing, then you do need to be targeting people who have a disposable income. Of course, that is a less volume than people who don't have disposable income, but of course from a performance perspective, from revenue, return on investment, etc., disposable income people will help. And they also might be interested in healthy recipes and related content. So from here you can kind of start building up a person or someone that you would target and start thinking about the types of things or types of content that you would target them with based on their interests. If we look at corporate wear, we can, I think, naturally assume that the people buying this are employed and educated. You could assume that they care about looking professional. They wouldn't perhaps be buying corporate wear in the first place if they didn't. They might want low maintenance, long lasting wear. Particularly, people are busy. They don't want to have to spend hours in the morning choosing what to wear, having to iron, things like that. So especially when it comes to working people, that could be quite a good assumption to make. If we look at maternity wear, then obviously we can assume that the woman is pregnant or women are pregnant. They are searching for and purchasing baby goods. They are willing to spend money on quality and comfort. And they might be looking at a new home or new car. Pregnancy is actually one of the defining moments in someone's life. There are a few things like moving to a new house, having a baby, getting married. Those are key points in someone's life. And actually research has shown that these are the times where people are most likely to change their minds about something. I think just because they're going through such a major life change, they're kind of questioning and looking at all the options. So yes, just a bit of interesting information on pregnancy. Step 4 would be to essentially culminate all the research and thinking that you have done in the previous 3 steps and create your target market statement. It looks a little something like this, and I'm going to just replace the words in square brackets with actual things. So it would sound something like, my target market is male, aged 25 to 40, who live in Michigan and like to play golf. What is very important is that you need to try and include the most important demographics and behaviors, and only 3 to 4 key points within your statement. The thing about that is, if you target too broadly, of course that is risky. But also, if you target too specifically, or if you are too specific, then that also can be risky. You run the risk of losing a lot of volume, of missing out on potential customers that do actually fit your brand. So yes, that's why it's important to keep it to 3 to 4. And some important things to remember is that if you are providing more than one product or service, a target market should be defined for each offering. You might find that even though the products are quite relevant to each other, that you have quite a different target market and therefore target audience. So it is important. Your target market and your target audience will differ, as your targeting options won't always fit your exact market. And here I'm referring specifically to paid media. That is the main focus of this course. In terms of organic and things like content marketing, then of course the content or the ads that you are creating you're not paying for them, but the way that they have been written is supposed to speak to your target market. Going back to paid media, it's not a bad thing that your target market and your target audience differ. And the reason for that is that you will exclude low performers as you accrue data. So whether it's a campaign that is running for a month or something that runs all the time, it is about constant analysis and optimization and removing the things that aren't performing for you. Now, this might sound all like Greek, and that's absolutely fine. But we will be covering this really as a whole throughout the rest of the course. Also, you may become aware of good performers that you hadn't considered. And that is the thing when I go back to saying, don't be too specific, because you don't know everything. Your research could have missed something. And that's the case whether you have a tiny budget to spend or quite a large budget. So it's always good to be less specific, if that makes sense. Moving on to buyer personas, which is where we get quite or more specific in terms of defining your target market. A buyer persona is a fictitious character that represents your typical target customers, and it is based on comprehensive audience research. How can they help you? Well, if you've clearly defined your target market and your customers, you can customize your communication across all channels so that it is actually more personalized and relevant to them. Of course, that will improve performance hugely. This insight allows you to increase the performance of your segments with marketing campaigns and content that specifically speaks to your market. So whether it's organic or paid media, these things can help. If we look at some free resources for creating buyer personas, there are a few. Of course, there's also third-party software or software as a service, which we mentioned in lesson 1, and various other paid tools and companies that you can pay to do market research and create buyer personas. But when it comes to small to medium businesses, it's not realistic. So we're not going to actually go through that. But starting off with analytics, of course, things like Google Analytics, it's a free platform. If you have your tracking installed on your website, then you can start to collect the data from the people that are visiting your site and create almost a group or a segment of people that are performing. You can also ask your employees, and they are a huge source of knowledge when it comes to getting to know your customers, especially if you have a customer support team or an overall support team. You should ask them the same questions and then aggregate the answers. Then there are surveys, which can be very handy as long as you really think about the questions that you're asking. What are you getting out of those questions? You can send a survey to your existing database, and there are various free tools. The ones that I'm thinking of at the moment would be Google Forms and then something called SurveyMonkey. So give those a look. Then finally, there are one-on-one interviews or focus groups. You could interview, for example, your most loyal customers. And you can create focus groups for very little cost, actually. It might sound like something that only big brands can do. I've created and participated in a few, and honestly, people don't expect payment for everything. When it comes to focus groups, if there's something interesting that is going to be discussed, and if the person is relevant to that, then many people are very willing to do something like that for free or very little. So you've created your target market statement, you have some buyer personas perhaps, and now what are the next steps? So in no particular order, when it comes to planning at least, you would need to look at the channels and using the channels that are best suited to your objectives, as well as where your target audience is. Then you need to look at your customer journey, which we're going to discuss just now. And this is based on data and research. And then you have your remarketing, which is retargeting non-converters. And in the middle of those three core things would be your ideal target audience. So if we look at the different targeting options across top channels, I'm first going to take you through the campaign types in Google Ads. We have search, which is keyword based, display, which is images on different websites, smart display, which is the same but it's automatically targeted, shopping campaigns, which are for, of course, e-commerce retail sites. Universal app campaigns are for people who have apps and want people to install or engage with their apps. And then there's Gmail sponsored promotions. And these are the ads that appear on the top of your Gmail inbox if you don't have a business account. Then there is finally YouTube, which is, of course, video ads on YouTube. You can also have banner ads on YouTube, but that would be part of a display campaign. The targeting options on Google Ads include keywords, so the search terms, the words that people type into the search engine. Then demographics, which is including gender, age, and location. In market, which is apparently or supposed to consist of people who are at the bottom of the funnel, so people who are ready to buy something. Then there is interests or affinities, and this is of course based on your search history and the websites that you visit. There are also website topics and content, and this is referring to the websites that you actually advertise on. So this is for display. You can either choose website topics, so let's just say finance as a topic, or you can choose specific content. That's based on keywords that are in the content of the websites. There is also automatic targeting, which is where machine learning comes in. And in terms of any insights or what is actually being targeted, we don't actually get to see much. There are audiences, which is where remarketing would fit in, but there are also custom and similar audiences available. And similar audiences is essentially looking at people who are similar to the people who have visited your site. Pretty straightforward. And then we have device, so that's mobile, tablet, or desktop. There is more on Google Ads in lesson 6 as well as throughout the rest of the course. Then we have Facebook. There are so many campaign types within Facebook. We have brand awareness, which focuses on things like impressions, reach, and ad recall. There's reach, which is pretty self-explanatory, reaching the most amount of people. Engagement is people engaging with your posts, so likes, comments, and shares. Lead gen is pretty straightforward, but that is on Facebook, so forms that you create on Facebook for people to fill out and submit. There's also conversions, and this is really a campaign suitable for any traffic that you're trying to send to your site. An example is if you're not having a lead gen form on Facebook, you might have one on your website for people to submit. Then there is also catalog sales, which is about retail, e-commerce. Those are the product ads that you can see appearing across Facebook. App installs, similar to Google Ads. Video views. Messages, which is referring to Messenger as well as WhatsApp. Store traffic for physical locations. Perhaps maybe you don't have an e-commerce site, or you do, but you also want physical traffic in your sites or your stores. Then the targeting options that you have available are demographics. That's pretty standard across all channels, really. Interests, behaviors, page followers, friends of followers, custom audiences, and lookalike audiences, which is the equivalent of similar audiences in Google Ads that we just mentioned. Then, of course, there is device again. Move on to LinkedIn, the different campaign types available. This is a really interesting channel. I love it more and more. It's changed so much. It's not really about just B2B and work talk and all of that. People actually share other content on this site now. So very interesting. Anyways, the campaign types are website visits, engagement, video views, lead generation, brand awareness, website conversions, and job applicants. The targeting options include demographics, company, and that includes a number of connections, the industries that they might be in, some company names, not all of them, and the size of the company, so how many employees they have. Education degrees, so you can target people who have a specific level of education, as well as fields of study. Then we have member schools, which is around kind of alumni groups and different groups that are available within LinkedIn. The job, that includes functions, so skills or things that people do in their jobs, titles, skills, and years of experience. We also have member groups and member interests. For Twitter, we have awareness, tweet engagements, followers, website clicks and conversions, app install, in-stream video views, and quick promote. I'll give a little bit more detail on some of these just now when we look at the targeting. So moving on to the targeting, we have demographics, of course, interests, followers, keywords, behaviors, tailored audiences, and movie and TV shows. Now, when it comes to the behaviors, these are supplied by Twitter partners and are based on actual online and offline behaviors and characteristics. It's similar to Google and Facebook. Movie and TV show targeting allows networks and brands to actually promote tweets to people engaged with specific TV shows and movies, either before, during, or after a telecast. The keyword targeting is based on tweets and searches, and the follower targeting works by displaying your Twitter ads to people who are similar to the followers of the usernames you select. So you could choose some usernames, let's say some celebrities or influencers that you think could be good for your brand. Then your ads would target people who are similar to those people. You can't target specific usernames. That would not be great. There is more on social in lessons 5 and 7 of this module, and of course throughout the rest of the course, but just focusing on this one for now. To remember with targeting some important things when it comes to interest targeting within social, and I'm here referring specifically actually to Facebook and Instagram. Interest targeting relies on the information that users have provided. So it's not based on machine learning or looking at search behaviors or anything like that. It's literally if they've liked pages that have to do with certain topics. So it's not always the best because it's not all inclusive of what these people are interested in. They don't add all their interests. I know I certainly don't. Then there is behavioral targeting, and that is important to remember that there are different behavioral targeting options depending on the channel that you choose. They aren't the same across the board like demographics. For example, on Facebook, you can target online shoppers, whereas on LinkedIn, you can't. Custom audience limitations. Some platforms only enable custom audience targeting once you've reached a certain spend, or the account is older than a required time frame, which definitely does vary. With age and gender, it's worth noting that you will only reach people who have disclosed this info. People who haven't, or if Google can't, I'm just using Google again as a search engine example, can't decipher what age and gender you are, then you fall within an unknown category. Regional constraints. I'm referring here to the fact that not all campaign and targeting options will be available in your region. So some things that I talk about in this course, you might not see when you're looking at those different channels or platforms. And in others, I might not see something and you may see something new before I do. So Then with starting broader, that's what I mean when we talk about the being specific and or being too specific and being too broad. You will decrease as you see what is and isn't performing. And finally, you need to test, test, test. So important. I cannot stress it enough. You don't have to use fancy software to be able to do tests. There are many options within the different platforms that enable you to test. There's also things you can do just manually across everything, not just with targeting. Please test often. Now we are going to move on to customer journey maps. And as we mentioned, I think in the last lesson, a customer journey is a detailed outline of every step a lead takes to become a paying customer. So when you are looking at creating a customer journey map, the first thing you need to do is set clear goals. What goals are you directing this map towards? What I mean by that is it a newsletter subscription, or is it filling out a lead form, or making a purchase, or clicking or finding out your directions? You know, you can't combine all of your different goals and interactions into one, because then it will just look crazy and confuse you. So you need to also ask, who is it about specifically, and what experience is it based on? Are they visiting your website directly, or is it first through social media? This is where touch points come in, which is what we're going to talk about now. You need to list your touch points from view to sale. So from the beginning of them being exposed to your brand to a sale. Touch points are all the places on your website, your marketing, and your content channels that your potential customers can interact with. You need to list all the touch points they are currently using, as well as the ones you believe they should be using. Now, I'm going to go through a few examples just to explain this better. If we look at before a sale, there are different areas or channels or platforms that would be common to interact with as a customer before a sale. So examples of this are social media, any social media channels you have. Any PPC campaigns you're running, so search engine marketing, anything like that. Word of mouth, any reviews that people might be reading, events that you've held, and perhaps your newsletter. Now, this list is not the end of your touch points. You then need to go into each one and list exactly the multiple interactions that they have with these different campaigns or channels. If we look at during a sale, then the different touch points would be perhaps a physical store, your website, any promotions that you're currently running, discounts or coupons or anything like that, your sales team and the point of sale, if it's again a physical store, or your online cart. And again, it's about breaking down each of these things, bearing your goal in mind, your core goal that you are trying to achieve when you're detailing this customer journey. But let's say you take online cart. Then that is one endpoint that you need to work towards, whether then it's from social media that the person came to the online cart, perhaps your newsletter, perhaps it was a search term, and so on. If we look at after sale, it could be invoicing, if that is how your business works, any marketing emails that you send out, your support team, any online assistance that is offered. And I'm separating that from support team because these days, most online assistance is done by a chatbot. Then we have upselling, for example, if you're going to be selling a converted customer something that is related to what they bought, or maybe not, but would fit them. And then newsletter subscriptions. You might want to encourage these just because the return on investment of email is huge, something we'll be discussing later on. And it could be involved. You saw it in the before example as well. So it kind of can actually fit in anywhere. It depends on you, the business, and etc. So what you need to do is take the customer journey as if you are a customer. You need to think about where you go when you have a problem. What do you do when you have a problem? How do you go about it? How do you discover the product or service? How do you make your purchase? Is it online? Is it through a store? Is it through an app, etc.? And then how do you interact with the business? Is it via email, phone call, social media, any other means? Those are the things in detail that you need to make note of. Now, once you've broken down each of your touch points into the minute kind of little details of every interaction, you might find that there are too few or too many touch points. Now, there's no magic number. I can't tell you what is too few or what is too many. It is something that you will really experience if you're doing this customer journey as a customer. You're looking at your site and all your different channels with a fresh pair of eyes and perhaps seeing things that you hadn't picked up on before. If there are too few touch points, it may be that users are getting turned away and therefore leaving your site too early. You might need to put some extra steps in on your site to guide them to the final end goal of a purchase or something. If you have too many touch points, then it could be a case of the process being too complicated, requiring too many steps. So what do you need to improve after all of this? For example, is your lead form too long or complicated? We're going to be talking about optimization of pages later on as well. But do you have too many questions? Are there too many steps? Perhaps you need to look at combining or reducing. Is your product or are your product descriptions unclear? Do they make sense? Are they detailed, or is it just a bunch of code or something that just really isn't describing your product at all? Are there too many steps to complete a purchase? Are there too many buttons that people have to click? I know it might seem like it's a split second, but it is actually quite frustrating if you just have to keep on going through multiple steps for something that you feel is actually quite simple. Again, it's a case of testing. And does your sales team need to offer better support? Now, this is obviously a very internal thing, and you will have internal processes and there's ways, quality assurance, all of those kinds of things. But that is very often where problems can lie. So I'm going to take you through an e-commerce touchpoint example. Here, a potential buyer sees an ad, searches for the product and sees an ad. She visits your website, browses through your products, and puts them in her cart. She fills in her information and makes payment, for which she receives confirmation. A few days later, her purchase is delivered, and she gives a review based on her experience. Sometime later, she receives an email with a discount, which she chooses to use. She clicks on the link, leading her to your landing page. She logs into her profile and adds the product to her cart with the discount applied. If we go through a lead gen touchpoint example, let's say a potential customer sees your ad on Facebook. He clicks on the ad, directing him to your landing page. He completes the form and chooses his preferred method of contact. Your sales team contact him and provide clear information. He needs time to make a decision, so to keep your brand top of mind, you remarket to him with relevant content that reminds him why he should choose your product or service. He requests a callback and takes up your offering. He submits all the required info, receives confirmation, and when billed, he makes payment. So you might think when it comes to submitting a lead that it actually would just be a few steps. But as you can see here, there are 15 touch points for this potential buyer's customer journey. So he came from Facebook. Someone who comes from another channel or visits your site directly could take a different journey, or there would be different touch points involved. Now we are moving on to the final part of today's lesson, which is remarketing, and that is how you target people who have fallen off the customer journey, who have decided not to convert. Let me explain a little bit more about what remarketing is. It is serving targeted ads to an audience that has interacted with your site or engaged with your social media ads. Now, this is not something you have to actively set up yourself. These are audiences that become available naturally within the different platforms. You then have to go and add them, but they are something that is kind of there by default, the standard lists, and we'll go through some now. But why is it essential? It's a cost-effective way to increase your sales as you're targeting people who have already expressed interest in your products or services. They've already engaged with your ads, they've clicked on an ad and visited your site, so they were interested in what you had to say, but something stopped them or prevented them from converting. So you don't want them to forget about you. You want to keep yourself top of mind. So there are some standard remarketing lists, which I told you about. They're there by default in most cases. You have all website visitors, so that's every single person who has visited your site. Then there are all website visitors excluding your converters, so everyone but the people who have made a purchase or submitted a lead. And then all converters. Now, this is people who have made a purchase, but you might want to remarket to them to sell them something else. And of course, just as well, keep yourself in their minds. Now, the all website visitors audience list is of course very broad, but it is a way, or a more cost-effective way, to bring people from the top of the funnel, so in awareness, let's say, further down the funnel. So you start targeting those people and then start segmenting them out based on how it's performing. That is a full strategy. We are looking at creating a full digital strategy in lesson 8, but let me finish here and just say that we need a certain amount of people to start running the remarketing list. In Google Ads, it can be up to 1,000, and in Facebook, it's 100. Similar across the other social media channels as well. Then some other remarketing lists. We have demographic segments, so split based on age, gender, or location. We also have time on site segments, which is based on the assumption that people who spend more time on your site are more interested. And then your social engagers, people who have liked or commented or just interacted with your ads in any way. There is an audience created for those. The process of creating remarketing lists does differ based on the channel, but it is generally pretty straightforward. So what can you actually do with your remarketing lists? I want to take you through some of these examples. All website visitors, we did just speak about it, but you can observe how site visitors perform against your other targeting. Perhaps there's a difference there. You can, of course, also be targeting them with different content that leads them further down your funnel. Then with all visitors excluding converters, you could target those people with special offers or discounts or free trials. Again, trying to move these people down further along the funnel, but avoiding the people who have already converted, because generally there'll be a different strategy for those people, or you just made the decision that you don't want to spend more marketing budget on people who have already bought from you. Then there's all converters. You can upsell other products here, which is very helpful. You can also maintain and increase your brand affinity, not necessarily on, let's say, PPC channels like Google Ads, but for something like social, it's very key. So definitely keep that in mind. With the demographic segments, you can target people with more relevant ads or products based on the demographics that you've chosen. Time on site, I said this earlier, but you can create or serve them different ad copy based on the assumption that more time on site equals more interest. And then social engagers, you could include different ad copy to encourage site visits and sales, because of course you don't just want them to remain on social and not actually visit your site. And then of course social is the place to create, maintain, and increase brand affinity, so people being more loyal to your brand and choosing you over others. And that is it for today. Thank you so much. Well done for getting here. What are we learning in lesson 4? You're going to see the impact of mobile, which is absolute madness, followed by mobile speed, importance, and tools. Then we will look at mobile-friendly landing pages and the difference really between mobile-friendly and responsive. And finally, the benefits of having an app. A quick recap, what were the outcomes of today's lesson? We looked at methods to determine your target market, targeting options within top channels, customer journey maps and consumer touchpoints, and then finally an introduction to remarketing. I have a challenge for you, and just so you know, it's going to be coming in every second lesson, so 1, 3, 5, and 8. I love doing this. I love receiving the responses, so please give it a go. Don't be afraid. No wrong answers, all that stuff. So I would like you to use a brand you know or your own brand and do the following. Choose a goal that you would like to achieve, for example, signing up for a newsletter or purchasing something. Visit their or your website or search for their brand and list all the touch points you experienced to get to the end goal. Obviously, you don't have to actually submit a lead or make a purchase unless you want to, but yes. Then please list the problems that you encountered and what you would do to improve on them. I will see you very soon for lesson 4. Thank you again. Bye, guys.